The American West, a land of wide open plains, thunderous hooves, and gunpowder justice. In that raw and untamed landscape, two names thundered louder than the rest: Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. To some, they were cold-blooded criminals. To others, rebellious folk heroes, men who defied corrupt systems and outran the long arm of the law with style, wit, and grit. But their story is far more complex than what time novels and Hollywood would have you believe. This is the real story of how the drifters rose to become the masterminds of the most daring train robberies in history, and how they disappeared into legend. Before he was known across the West as Butch Cassidy, he was Robert Leroy Parker, born on April 13, 1866, in Beaver, Utah. His parents were devout Mormon pioneers, hard-working settlers who carved a life out of the harsh desert. Young Robert grew up on a ranch, learning to ride, rope, and repair before he could even write his full name. But the boy had a curious mind and a restless spirit. As a teenager, he took odd jobs across ranches, farms, and mines. It was during these years he met a man who would shape his future: Mike Cassidy, a charismatic cowboy and part-time wrestler. Robert idolized Mike, and when his mentor eventually fled the law, Robert honored him by adopting his last name. Thus, Butch Cassidy was born. By his early 20s, Butch had turned to a life of crime, starting small with cattle, rustling, and horse thievery, then moving up to bank robbery and train heists. What set him apart, though, was his code. He avoided unnecessary violence. He was known to be polite, even apologetic, during his crimes. Witnesses often said he smiled as he robbed them. He saw himself not as a killer, but as a clever businessman, just one operating outside the law. If Butch Cassidy was the brains, then the Sundance Kid was the trigger. Born Harry Alonzo Longable in 1867 in Montclair, Pennsylvania, Sundance didn't start out in the West, but like many Easterners seeking adventure, he headed out young. At 15, he was already roaming Wyoming, working as a ranch hand, but it wasn't long before he turned to crime. In 1887, at the age of 20, he was arrested for stealing a horse near the town of Sundance, Wyoming, a name that would stick with him for life. Sundance was a deadly marksman with a calm demeanor and a reputation for loyalty. Where Butch would sweet-talk a bank clerk, Sundance stood ready, hand twitching near his revolver. When the two finally met in the late 1890s, it was a match made in outlaw heaven. Together, they joined forces with a loose confederation of criminals that would soon become infamous: the Wild Bunch. The gang included names like Kid Curry, Elsie Lay, Ben Kilpatrick, and others, but Butch and Sundance were always the stars. Their specialty? Robbing trains, not the sloppy, chaotic ambushes seen in movies. These were well-planned, tactically executed heists, where they often got away before the law could even respond. Between 1897 and 1901, the Wild Bunch pulled off some of the boldest train robberies in American history. Their most famous began on the night of June 2, 1899. Near Wilcox, Wyoming, the Union Pacific Overland Flyer was steaming through the prairie when it was flagged down. The Wild Bunch boarded, held the crew at gunpoint, and set dynamite charges on the express car. The blast destroyed the car and inside, a safe loaded with cash. They vanished into the wilderness, chased by posses and bounty hunters, but no one could catch them. That job alone netted them an estimated $30,000, nearly $1 million in today's money. Just 3 months later, they struck again, this time near Folsom, New Mexico. Another train, another explosion, another pile of cash, and always the same ending: escape. But their success painted a bullseye on their backs. The Pinkerton National Detective Agency was hired to hunt them. The U.S. Marshals Service got involved. Train companies doubled security and started arming guards with Gatling guns. Still, the Wild Bunch persisted until the walls finally began closing in. By 1901, the heat was unbearable. The law was getting closer, and the Wild Bunch was falling apart, many captured or killed. So Butch and Sundance did the unthinkable. They vanished, along with Sundance's companion. At a place, the pair fled to Argentina, sailing under assumed names James Ryan and Harry Place. There, in the remote countryside of Patagonia, they tried to reinvent themselves. They bought land, started a cattle ranch, and lived like respectable settlers. Locals knew them as quiet, well-mannered Americans. But the illusion didn't last. By 1905, reports surfaced of two North American bandits robbing banks across Bolivia and northern Argentina. Their descriptions matched Butch and Sundance. Once again, they were America's most wanted, this time on foreign soil. The trio moved constantly, staying ahead of lawmen and bounty hunters. Etta Place eventually disappeared from history. Some say she returned to the US. Others believe she died in South America. Butch and Sundance kept moving, robbing where they could, always a few steps ahead until their luck finally ran out. November 1908, San Vicente, Bolivia. Two men foreigners robbed a mining company courier carrying a payroll. They fled on mules, tracked by local soldiers and police. The trail led to a small boarding house. When authorities arrived, they surrounded the building. What followed was a violent, late-night gunfight. Witnesses reported hearing dozens of shots. Inside, the two bandits held their ground until the very end. At dawn, the Bolivians stormed the house. Two bodies were found. Locals claimed they were Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. The American consulate was notified. But here's the catch. There were no fingerprints, no photographs, no confirmed identification. The bodies were buried in unmarked graves. And just like that, the story ended. Or did it? Almost immediately, rumors surfaced that the pair had escaped, that the shootout was a ruse, or that the men killed were not Butch and Sundance at all. Over the decades, alleged sightings of the outlaws emerged across the US. One theory suggests Butch returned to his family in Utah, living under the name William T. Phillips, dying peacefully in 1937. Another claims Sundance moved to Chile, changed his identity, and died in anonymity. To this day, no DNA tests have confirmed who died in that Bolivian shootout. Their true fate remains a mystery. What's undeniable is their place in history. In 1969, the Hollywood film Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, starring Paul Newman and Robert Redford, catapulted their story into pop culture legend. But beyond the glamour of film, the real Butch and Sundance were symbols of the closing. Frontier men caught between two eras. They were born into a Wild West that was vanishing. The telegraph, the railroad, and barbed wire were taming the land. Law and order were spreading, and there was no more room for outlaws on horseback. Yet they resisted the inevitable. They robbed trains not for greed alone, but for the thrill, for the rebellion, for the life it offered outside of rules and expectations. They weren't perfect. They were thieves, but they lived by a code, and many admired their style, robbing without bloodshed, escaping with flair, and never backing down. Even now, their names stir fascination. They've inspired books, movies, songs, and documentaries. Their life and supposed death still spark debate in outlaw circles and forensic labs alike. Did they die in Bolivia, or did two legends of the American West outfox the world one last time and ride off into a quiet, anonymous sunset? They came from nothing. They stole from the powerful, and they left behind a story the world can't stop telling. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid weren't just outlaws. They were architects of their own myth, and maybe, just maybe, they got away with it. If you love this deep dive into the Wild West's most legendary duo, make sure to subscribe and ring that bell. Here on Crimes Through Time, we uncover history's boldest criminals, coldest cases, and the legends that refuse to die. And now, it's your turn. Do you believe Butch and Sundance really died in Bolivia? Or did they fake their deaths and live out their days in peace? Tell us your theory in the comments. Until next time, stay curious, stay bold,